I found the receipt folded into the bottom of my baby's diaper bag. Not mine, not even our store. It was from a boutique hotel in Scottsdale, with 2 toothbrush kits charged to the room. And the timestamp? 2:17 a.m. The same night he swore, hand on my stomach, eyes all soft. He was stuck closing the restaurant. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just sat on the nursery floor, holding that receipt like it could explain why I'd been feeling erased. But I'm getting ahead of myself. If you asked me back then, I would have told you I got lucky. Like, real lucky. Because the man I married didn't look like trouble. He looked like stability. He looked like the kind of guy your aunt would nod at in church and say, "Now that's a good one." He was clean-cut, calm voice, firm handshake, always made eye contact like he was present, even when he wasn't. And I didn't know how to read that yet. Back then, I thought calm meant safe. I was 26, living in a beige apartment in Chandler, Arizona, the kind where every unit smells like laundry detergent and someone's air fryer. I worked front desk at a dental office. Nothing glamorous, but steady. I paid my bills. I drank iced coffee like it was a personality. And I wasn't desperate. I was just tired. Tired of guys who weren't ready. Tired of being someone's almost. Tired of dating men who acted like basic kindness deserved a trophy. So when Evan showed up, older than me, established, confident, my brain basically went, oh, finally, a grown-up. That was my first mistake. Evan had this gift where he could walk into a room and instantly figure out what everybody wanted, and then mirror it back to them. To his friends, he was the funny, generous guy. To his employees, he was the tough but fair boss. To my parents, he was respectful, old school, the type who said ma'am, and offered to carry groceries without being asked. And to me, he was intensely attentive. At first, he remembered tiny details, like that I hated pickles, that I cried during dog rescue videos, that my mom's laugh got louder when she was nervous. He'd file those things away like he was studying for a test called How to Win Her. It didn't feel fake. It felt flattering. Because honestly, I wasn't used to being studied in a loving way. But even early on, there were small tells, not red flags, more like beige flags. Like the emotional equivalent of a flickering kitchen light you keep ignoring because you're busy. He didn't really talk about his past, just vague outlines. A crazy ex, a toxic business partner, a family that doesn't get him. And I believed him because he told it like a man who had survived something unfair. Also, this is important, Evan didn't rage, he didn't yell, he didn't punch walls, he did something scarier. He stayed controlled. Even when he was cruel, it came out polished. Like he was delivering customer service, while quietly humiliating you. You know those men who can hurt you without raising their voice? Yeah, that. We met through a friend of a friend at a little local fundraiser. One of those community nights where they raffle gift baskets and everyone pretends to love networking. Evan owned part of a small restaurant group. Not huge, but enough. He was the guy people wanted to know. He bought my drink. He listened. He laughed at the right places. Then, as we were leaving, he did this thing. He stepped slightly in front of me when a drunk guy stumbled too close. Just a half step. A tiny gesture. But my body clocked it like, protected. And that's what I was actually chasing. Not love, protection. 2 weeks later, he was texting me good morning every day. 3 weeks later, he was planning dates like a boyfriend. A month later, he was saying things like, "I've never felt this with anyone." I remember sitting in my car outside a Target, staring at that text like it was a miracle. Because it was the exact sentence every woman wants to believe, right before she learns why she shouldn't. The first time I saw the real Evan, like the first crack in the glass, was over something stupid. We were at a Mexican spot in Tempe. Loud music, sticky tables, the whole vibe. The server came over and I smiled and said, "Hey, how are you?" Normal, friendly. I've always been like that. I'm warm. I talk to people. It's not flirting. It's being human. The server walks away and Evan leans in, still smiling, and says, soft as velvet, "Don't do that." I blinked. Don't do what? That thing. The sweet voice. The eye contact. You don't need to perform for strangers. Perform. Like my personality was an act. I laughed a little because I didn't know what else to do. I was just being nice. And he goes, "I know. I'm just telling you how men take it." And then he took a sip of his drink like he'd done me a favor. I told myself he was protective, that he cared, but something in me shrank, just a millimeter. And the weird part is, I noticed. I just didn't respect the noticing yet. Evan proposed 6 months in. 6. I know. I can hear you judging me through the screen. Trust me, I've done it to myself in the shower, in the mirror, in the middle of the night like it was a hobby. But it wasn't random. He built a world where it made sense. He talked about legacy. He talked about family values. He talked about wanting kids while we're still young enough to enjoy them. And my friends, half of them were getting married. My mom, thrilled. My dad, quiet but approving. Evan knew how to handle him. Sports talk, hard work talk, man-to-man talk. And I was flattered that someone so together wanted me that badly. So I said yes. We got married in this little outdoor venue in Gilbert. String lights, eucalyptus, the whole Pinterest package. I wore a dress I couldn't afford, and a smile that felt like I was finally catching up to everyone else's timeline. That should have been my second mistake. After the wedding, people kept asking me, "How's married life?" And I'd say, "Great, busy," because that was technically true. Evan's businesses were in a growth phase. He was always working, always on calls, always handling something. And slowly, without any big dramatic fight, I started rearranging myself around him. If he was stressed, I became quiet. If he was tired, I stopped asking questions. If he didn't like a friend, I saw that friend less. If he didn't like my clothes, I wore them less. If he didn't like how I said something, I said it differently. It didn't feel like control. It felt like cooperation, like being a good wife. Except the longer I played that role, the more I felt like I was watching myself from across the room, like I was there, but not fully. And here's the part that messes with you. Nothing was technically wrong. No bruises, no screaming matches, no obvious villain, just this quiet pressure, like living under a ceiling that kept lowering 1 inch at a time until you forget what standing up straight feels like. By the time I got pregnant, I'd already started doing this thing where I'd pause before speaking and run my words through his invisible filter first. Like, will this annoy him? Will this start something? Will he twist this later? And I told myself that was maturity, but it was actually fear. And then, one night, months later, I found that receipt in the diaper bag. 2 toothbrush kits, 2:17 a.m. And suddenly, every nothing is wrong feeling I'd been swallowing rose up like it had been waiting for proof. By the time my belly started showing, people treated me like I'd won something. At the grocery store, at church, at Evan's restaurant when I'd stop by with takeout containers balanced on my hip. "Glow looks good on you. You're so lucky. He's such a provider." Everyone said it like it was a fact. And that's the part that messes with your head later, when the outside world keeps confirming a story your body is quietly rejecting. Because if I'm being honest, nothing felt wrong. It just felt heavy, like I was constantly carrying something invisible. Evan worked late. That wasn't new. Restaurants don't sleep, he liked to say. Emergencies don't wait. So I learned to eat dinner alone, then to eat earlier, then to eat standing at the counter because sitting felt too quiet. He stopped asking how my day was, but he'd ask what I spent money on. Not aggressively, casually, like bookkeeping. "You went to Target again? What did you need?" "Just curious." And I'd explain, even when it was obvious. Diapers, prenatal vitamins, milk. I started keeping receipts without realizing why. Like my body knew I'd need proof someday. Here's what Evan was good at. He never told me no. He just made yes uncomfortable. If I wanted to see my friends, he wouldn't forbid it. He'd just sigh. Or say, "Must be nice to have that kind of time." Or, "I wish I could relax like that." So eventually, I stopped asking. If I wanted to talk about how lonely I felt, he wouldn't dismiss me outright. He'd listen, quietly, then say something like, "I think you're projecting stress onto me." Or, "This pregnancy has you emotional." Always calm, always reasonable. And somehow, I'd walk away apologizing. That's the kind of man he was. No explosions, just erosion. Looking back, this should have stood out more. Evan loved to talk about women as concepts. Women are emotional. Women read too much into things. Women create drama when they're bored. He never said you. He said women, which somehow felt less personal, until I realized I was included. When I pushed back, gently, he'd smile and say, "You're different. That's why I chose you." Chosen, like I was an exception to my own gender. That should have scared me. Instead, it made me try harder to stay exceptional. There was a night, I remember it clearly because it was raining, the soft Arizona kind that barely counts. I was 7 months pregnant, sitting on the couch, scrolling through baby names. Evan was in the kitchen, typing furiously on his phone. I said, "Do you like the name Luke?" He didn't look up, just said, So I waited, a full minute. Then I said, "Can you look at me for a second?" He sighed, put the phone down, looked annoyed. "What?" I don't even remember what I said after that. Something small, something stupid. But I remember how I felt, like I'd interrupted something more important, like my presence required justification. That was the moment I realized I was married and still alone. And here's where the mind starts protecting the lie. I told myself, he's under pressure. This is what adulthood looks like. Love isn't supposed to be exciting forever. Maybe I'm just needy. Maybe I expect too much. I normalized the pain because it didn't come with screaming. I told myself other women had it worse. And that sentence, other women have it worse, kept me quiet for a long time. Evan started guarding his phone. Not obviously, just subtle shifts, taking calls in the garage, turning the screen away, silencing notifications at night. When I asked, carefully, he laughed. You think I'm cheating? A pause. That's insulting. And I immediately felt ashamed. Because how do you accuse a man who looks that calm, that controlled? So I dropped it, but my body didn't. I started waking up at 3 a.m. for no reason, heart racing, mouth dry. I stopped singing in the shower, stopped dressing up, stopped recognizing myself in photos. I didn't feel sad. I felt muted. When I went into labor, Evan wasn't there. He said he was closing a deal, something important, something time-sensitive. I labored with my sister instead. When he finally arrived, hours later, he kissed my forehead and said, "You did great," like I'd completed a task. He held our son for the photos, posted one online with the caption, "Blessed." Everyone commented hearts. I stared at that post from the hospital bed and felt nothing. If you'd asked me then if something was wrong, I would have said no, because nothing had happened. No betrayal, no explosion, no proof. Just this quiet sense that I was shrinking to fit inside a life that looked perfect from the outside. And I thought that was normal. I thought that was marriage. I thought love required disappearing a little. The signs didn't come with alarms. They didn't show up as screaming matches or slammed doors or lipstick on a collar. They came quietly, casually, so normal that I didn't know I was supposed to be afraid. That's the part people don't understand. If something had exploded, I would have reacted. If something had shattered, I would have moved. But nothing broke. Things just shifted. It happened at a dinner party. Not even a party, really. Just one of those double date nights where the food is decent and everyone pretends they're relaxed. We were sitting at a round table, low lighting, soft music, Evan's friends, his territory. I was mid-story. Something harmless. A small anecdote about getting lost driving there because the GPS rerouted me. I was laughing at myself when Evan cut in. "That's not how it happened." His voice wasn't sharp. It was calm, almost amused. He corrected a detail, then another. Everyone laughed. Not at me, just with him. And I laughed too. But inside, something paused. Because it wasn't about being wrong. It was about being overwritten. Later, in the car, I brought it up carefully. The way you do when you're already bracing to be dismissed. "Hey, when you corrected me like that earlier, it kind of made me feel stupid." He didn't look at me right away. Then he said, "You're being sensitive." I was just clarifying. That word became a pattern, because clarification sounds helpful. It sounds reasonable. It sounds like something a calm man does. And suddenly, my feelings felt inconvenient. After that night, I noticed something new. I started hesitating before I spoke. Just a fraction of a second. A pause long enough to run my sentence through a mental filter. Is this accurate? Will he contradict me? Will I look foolish? I'd always been someone who spoke freely. Warm, expressive, animated. But slowly, my words started shrinking. Not because he told me to stop talking, but because it felt safer to say less. The disagreements that followed were never about big things. They were about tone, timing, what was said, how it was said. I'd say, "You told me you'd be home by 8. He'd say, "I said I'd try." I'd say, "You promised." He'd say, "You assumed." And he said it with such confidence, such certainty. Eventually, I stopped trusting my own recollection. I began adding disclaimers to everything I said. I might be wrong, but maybe I misunderstood. Correct me if I'm remembering this wrong. I didn't notice that I was slowly giving up authority over my own experience. I just thought I was being fair. There was a Tuesday night, ordinary, forgettable, which is why it stands out now. Evan texted saying he'd be late. Inventory issues. Always inventory issues. I didn't question it. Around midnight, I checked our shared account. Habit, more than suspicion. There was a charge. Valet parking. Downtown Phoenix. I stared at the screen longer than necessary. His restaurant wasn't downtown. I remember feeling a wave of nausea, not panic, not anger, just discomfort. And then my mind did something impressive. It protected him. Maybe the app was wrong. Maybe he met someone from corporate. Maybe I stopped myself, because thinking further felt dangerous. A few days later, I asked him, softly, casually, carefully, "Hey, this might be nothing, but I saw a valet charge downtown the other night." He didn't react the way guilty people do. He didn't snap. He didn't panic. He looked hurt. "Wow," he said quietly. "That's disappointing. Disappointing. I thought you trusted me." And suddenly the focus wasn't the charge. It was my character. I apologized. Immediately. I felt ashamed for even asking. That's the kind of man he was. He didn't deny things aggressively. He reframed them until you felt embarrassed for noticing. I didn't know he was living a double life yet, but I felt like I was married to two versions of the same person, one who existed in public, charming, responsible, admired, and another who came home, distant, irritated, empty. He stopped touching me. Not dramatically, gradually. No hand on my lower back, no casual affection, no absent-minded kisses. When I asked, he said he was tired, so I told myself to be understanding. But my body felt rejected long before my mind accepted it. One afternoon, I went to the restaurant without telling him. Paperwork, something minor. I saw him before he saw me, standing at the bar, leaning in, laughing. There was a woman with him. Her hand brushed his arm. It lasted seconds. But in those seconds, I saw something I hadn't seen in months. Him, energized. When he noticed me, his expression changed instantly. Not guilt, annoyance. Later, I asked who she was. "Customer," he said, then added, "Why?" That why felt like a warning, so I let it go. Again. The fear didn't come from him. It came from me. From noticing that I was rehearsing conversations before having them. From realizing I was managing his moods like a job. From understanding that I no longer spoke freely in my own home. I stood in the bathroom one night, brushing my teeth, staring at my reflection, and I thought, when did my life start feeling like something I need permission to live? That question scared me more than any proof ever could. So when I found the receipt, folded into the diaper bag, 2 toothbrush kits, 2:17 a.m., it didn't shock me. It confirmed something my body had already been carrying. All the quiet moments lined up. The corrections, the silence, the exhaustion, the doubt, there were signs. I just didn't know how to name them yet. That receipt wasn't the betrayal. It was the permission. Permission to stop explaining things away. Permission to trust myself again. Permission to admit, quietly, internally, something was wrong. And it had been for a long time. The night everything finally broke wasn't dramatic. No shouting, no thrown objects, no cinematic confrontation. It was quiet, which somehow made it worse. I waited 2 days after finding the receipt. 2 full days of acting normal. I cooked, I cleaned, I asked how work was. I listened to him talk about staffing issues and food costs like my world wasn't quietly imploding. That's the part people don't talk about. How much acting happens before the truth is spoken out loud. On the 3rd night, after the baby was asleep, I sat across from him at the kitchen table. Same table where we'd eaten takeout after our wedding. Same table where we'd argued about paint colors. Same table where I'd slowly learned how to keep my voice even. I slid the receipt toward him, didn't accuse, didn't cry, just said, "Can you explain this to me?" He looked at it for maybe 2 seconds. Then he smiled, not kindly, not nervously, politely. "Oh," he said, "that." And in that moment, I knew. Not because of what he said next, but because of how relaxed he was. He didn't panic. He didn't ask where I found it. He leaned back in his chair and said, "You really went digging, didn't you?" Digging. Like I'd uncovered something hidden on purpose. Like I was the one crossing a line. He told me a story. A clean one. Practiced. Efficient. He said the hotel was for a potential investor. He said the toothbrush kits were standard. He said the timing was off because of billing delays. He spoke like a man used to being believed. And I realized, very suddenly, that he wasn't lying now. He'd been lying for a long time. I asked one question. Just one. "Why didn't you tell me?" And something shifted. Not rage, not fear, irritation. "Because," he said slowly, "I didn't think I needed to justify every detail of my life. Every detail. I wasn't asking for details. I was asking for honesty." But in his mind, those two things were interchangeable. That's when he said it. The sentence that rearranged everything. "You're making this bigger than it is." I remember thinking, this is it. This is the line. The place where my reality and his version of it could no longer coexist. Within minutes, the conversation wasn't about the receipt. It was about me, my tone, my insecurity, my issues with trust. He said things like, "You've changed since the baby. You're always suspicious lately. I feel like I'm walking on eggshells around you." Walking on eggshells. I almost laughed, because I'd been doing that for years, but I didn't laugh. I sat there, nodding, absorbing blame like it was my responsibility to keep the peace. And that's when I felt it. Not sadness, not anger, clarity, cold, steady clarity. I didn't leave that night. I wish I could say I did, that I stood up, packed a bag, walked out into some symbolic darkness. I didn't. I went to bed next to him and stared at the ceiling, listening to his breathing, even, unbothered. Around 2 a.m., I got up to check on the baby, and on my way back, I saw his laptop open on the couch. I wasn't snooping. I was exhausted, but the screen was bright, and my name, my actual name, was open in a message thread. That stopped me. I won't go into graphic details, not because they weren't devastating, but because what mattered wasn't what I found. It was how organized it all was. Conversations archived, plans scheduled, expenses tracked. This wasn't a mistake. This was a system, a whole life running parallel to mine. And suddenly, every late night, every absence, every correction, every moment of emotional distance made sense. I wasn't paranoid. I was excluded. I didn't cry. I shook. My hands, my legs. I had to sit down on the floor to keep from collapsing. This wasn't heartbreak. It was disorientation, like realizing you've been living in a house where the walls slowly moved inward, and you just noticed you can't stretch your arms anymore. When I confronted him the next morning, I didn't yell. I asked one final question. How long? He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "Does it matter?" That was the moment, the exact second something in me shut off, because if time didn't matter, neither did the marriage, neither did the vows, neither did me. He didn't beg. He didn't apologize. He said things like, "I never meant to hurt you. I didn't plan for it to happen this way. You're stronger than you think." That last one almost made me sick, because it sounded like praise, but felt like dismissal. The collapse wasn't loud. It was internal. It was the realization that I'd been loving someone who didn't exist. I'd been adjusting myself to a moving target. I'd been disappearing while calling it compromise. And the worst part? I had no idea who I was without that role. Wife, supporter, understanding one. Those identities dissolved overnight. By the end of that week, I wasn't crying anymore. I wasn't angry. I was empty. And emptiness is dangerous, because it's quiet enough to mistake for peace. I didn't know it yet, but this was the lowest point. Not because I'd lost him, but because I hadn't found myself yet. After everything came out, nothing exploded. No screaming, no dramatic exit, no moment where I suddenly felt brave. There was just waiting. That's the only word that fits. Waiting feels passive from the outside, but inside, it's exhausting. It's where your body finally stops running, and your mind catches up. The house felt different after the truth came out. Not haunted, not tense, just misaligned, like furniture that had been moved slightly overnight. I'd walk into a room and feel disoriented, even though nothing had changed. Same couch, same counters, same framed photos, but I didn't belong to those spaces anymore. I started noticing details I'd ignored for years. The way my voice sounded quieter in that house. The way I instinctively lowered the volume on the TV. The way I tiptoed at night, even when no one was asleep. That wasn't love. That was conditioning. Days passed, but they didn't move forward. I woke up, fed the baby, cleaned bottles, answered emails, folded laundry. Life continued in small, mechanical motions. Evan moved through the house like a polite stranger. Not hostile, not warm, just neutral. And that neutrality was its own kind of cruelty, because anger would have meant emotion. This felt like I'd been downgraded to a logistical problem. One afternoon, I realized something strange. The house was quiet. Not peaceful quiet, empty quiet. And for the first time, I noticed how much noise I'd been making before. Emotionally, explaining myself, justifying feelings, softening statements. Now there was none of that, and the silence didn't feel scary. It felt unfamiliar, like a muscle I hadn't used in years. Shame doesn't arrive all at once. It circles. I'd be fine for an hour, then suddenly remember something I'd said to a friend years ago. He's just busy. He's under a lot of pressure. It's not that bad. Those sentences echoed back to me, and the shame wasn't about him. It was about me, about how convincingly I defended someone who was quietly dismantling me. That kind of shame is isolating. because you don't feel like a victim. You feel complicit. My body started doing things before my mind understood them. I slept lighter. I breathed deeper. My shoulders dropped for the first time in years. I stopped clenching my jaw. I didn't realize how tense I'd been until the tension wasn't there anymore. That scared me, because it meant my body had been living in survival mode. And I'd called it normal. Late at night, while the baby slept, questions surfaced. Not emotional ones, structural ones. Who was I before this relationship? What parts of me did I shrink to make this work? What did I stop wanting because it was inconvenient? Those questions didn't demand answers. They demanded honesty. And honesty takes time. The email account wasn't about secrecy. It was about ownership. Typing my full name into the setup field felt strangely intimate, like introducing myself to myself again. I stared at the inbox. Empty, quiet, untouched. No expectations, no explanations, just space. I didn't send anything from it. I just needed to know it existed, that I existed. I remember standing in line at a pharmacy, holding a prescription. The woman in front of me complained about traffic. The cashier joked about the weather. And I thought, how is the world still this normal? My life had cracked open, and yet, nothing around me acknowledged it. That was when I understood something important. Closure doesn't come from the outside. No one pauses the world for your realization. You have to move anyway. Evan asked one night casually, "Are you okay?" Old me would have explained, softened, managed his reaction. Instead, I paused and said, "I don't know yet." He nodded, and that was it. No argument, no follow-up, but something in me shifted, because that was the first honest answer I'd given without cushioning it. I stopped thinking of myself as his wife, not consciously, just quietly. I started thinking in singular terms. What do I want to eat? What do I need today? What feels right for me? Those questions felt selfish at first, then necessary, then natural. Hope is a strange thing. It can keep you alive, or keep you stuck. There was a night when I realized I wasn't hoping he'd change anymore. Not because I was angry, but because I was tired of waiting for someone else to arrive. That's when hope shifted directions, from him to me. That's what this phase really was. Not waiting for answers. Not waiting for apologies. Waiting for my nervous system to understand what my mind already knew. Waiting for my identity to catch up with reality. Waiting for enough strength to accumulate quietly. No announcements, no declarations, just readiness. I didn't decide to leave in one moment. The decision formed slowly, like condensation on glass. Unavoidable. I started organizing documents, researching apartments, making lists, not dramatic lists, practical ones. And with each small action, I felt steadier, less foggy, more real. One night, I stood in the doorway of the nursery, watching my baby sleep, and it hit me. If I stayed, this silence would become his normal too. Not yelling, not chaos, but emotional absence. And that was the moment the waiting ended. Not because I was brave, but because I was awake. The waiting room doesn't prepare you for what comes next. It prepares you to survive it. And I was done waiting. I didn't wake up one day knowing exactly how to leave. It wasn't a decision that arrived fully formed. It was more like something that kept tapping on my shoulder, quietly, until I couldn't pretend I didn't feel it anymore. After that waiting phase, things became very practical, almost boring. And strangely, that's what made it real. I called a lawyer on a Tuesday morning while the baby was napping. I remember that because I almost hung up twice before she answered. Not because I was scared of her, but because saying it out loud would make it permanent. She didn't rush me. She didn't dramatize anything. She just listened. And when she finally said, "You're not imagining this," my body reacted before my mind did. My legs went weak. I had to sit on the floor of the hallway with my back against the wall, holding the phone like it was the only solid thing in the room. No one had said that to me in a long time. From there, everything moved in small, unglamorous steps. Paperwork, numbers, schedules, words like custody and separation and documentation. None of it felt empowering in the moment. It felt heavy, but it also felt clean. Like I was finally dealing with reality instead of negotiating with confusion. I told Evan a few days later. No dramatic timing, no speech prepared in advance. The house was quiet. The baby was with my sister. The light coming in through the kitchen window made everything look too normal for what I was about to say. "I've spoken to a lawyer," I told him. "I'm leaving." He looked at me for a long second, like he was recalculating something internally. Then he said, "I think you're overreacting." And I noticed something immediately. My chest didn't tighten. My voice didn't shake. I didn't feel the need to explain myself. "I know you think that," I said. That was it. There was no argument to win anymore, no version of the story I needed him to understand. That chapter had already closed inside me. After I moved out, I started to notice changes in how people spoke to me. Friends were careful, polite, slightly distant. Later, I understood why. He was telling people I was overwhelmed, that postpartum had been hard on me, that he was worried, always worried. He didn't sound angry when he said it. He sounded compassionate. And I realized something that surprised me. I didn't feel the urge to correct him. For years, I had lived in reaction, explaining, clarifying, defending my reality. I was done. Let him have the story. I had my life. The apartment I moved into wasn't impressive. Second floor, thin walls, a kitchen that smelled faintly like someone else's mornings. I slept on a mattress on the floor the first night, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes. And still, I slept better than I had in years. Not because I was happy, but because my nervous system finally felt safe enough to rest. The weeks after that weren't triumphant. They were quiet, disorienting. I caught myself lowering my voice when I was alone, rehearsing conversations that no longer needed to happen, waiting for reactions that never came. Old habits don't disappear just because the environment changes. They unwind slowly. I rebuilt my life without any kind of transformation montage. No reinvention, no glow-up, just routine. Morning walks with the stroller. Same route, same time, cooking simple meals, going to bed early. I needed predictability. I needed to feel my own rhythm again. One morning, standing in line at a coffee shop, the barista asked for my name, and I said it, immediately, clearly, no hesitation, no softening, just my name. And it hit me how long it had been since I'd said it like that, like it belonged to me. Co-parenting with Evan settled into something neutral. Brief exchanges, logistics, schedules. He was still calm, still reasonable, still himself, but his tone no longer dictated how my body reacted. That was the difference. I didn't need him to become a villain for this to be valid. I didn't need him to admit anything. I just needed space to be real again. Looking back now, I understand something I couldn't see then. I didn't marry a monster. I married someone who valued control more than connection, someone who needed to manage the narrative, someone who could slowly erase you without ever raising his voice. And I stayed because nothing was obviously wrong, until I realized I was disappearing. My life now is smaller than the one I had before, less polished, less impressive on paper. But it's honest. I speak without rehearsing. I rest without guilt. I make decisions without scanning the room first. And that's how I know I'm free. Not because I escaped something dramatic, but because I came back to myself, quietly, fully. If this story felt familiar, even in small ways, you're not imagining it. A lot of women live through things like this quietly. Some are still inside it, others are just now finding words for what they survived. This space is for those stories, and for the women who recognize themselves in them. If you want to keep hearing narratives like this, subscribe and stay close. New episodes are coming. And if you know someone who might need this story, someone who feels confused, invisible, or quietly exhausted, share it with her. Sometimes the first step out is knowing you're not the only one.